Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. Here are four big stories that you want to be aware of today. So, there are videos that have surfaced online allegedly showing North Korean soldiers at a Russian military base. Authenticity remains uncertain, but I've seen this again and again by other places. Here's another video that was just sent to me. By the way, thank you, Liz, for tagging me with this. And Spravdi. Newly obtained footage from Russia's Servitsky training ground shows North Korean troops being outfitted in Russian gear in preparation for deployment to Ukraine. Again, this is all very new, very breaking. As far as we know, this is legit, but what we do know is that Budanov himself says there's 11,000 North Koreans, soldiers that are currently undergoing training in eastern Russia. They will be ready to participate in combat against Ukraine by November 1st. That's according to Budanov, right? Pretty authoritative source. Again, rumors are out that Putin is actually trying to negotiate for 150,000 North Korean troops. And again, Budanov has said 11,000. It could be more. Now, I don't know how much. Somebody was saying, well, you said they're crack troops. No, that's not what we said yesterday. Yesterday we said the engineers are good. We didn't say the infantry is good. We don't know how they'll fight or how well equipped they will be or anything along those lines, or who will desert or anything along those lines. So please don't read into what's been said. But we know that there's 11, maybe even more than that, maybe even 12,000 according to Reuters. More confirmation of North Korea's involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine as South Korean intelligence reports 12,000 troops. Okay, so. And they want 150,000, and the North Koreans are saying that 1.4 million signed up or re-enlisted recently. I'm not sure what else to tell you here. This is bad. Okay, so that's what we know with North Korea involvement in Russia on the way to Ukraine as of right now. Okay, second big story. At the BRICS Summit, Putin made a telling remark. Quote, "I welcome the new recruits," unquote, he said. Now, this is a military term for those who fight a war, and that's exactly how Putin sees these BRIC countries. Now, the BRICS is just an economic partnership where they can trade more freely and more readily. And this is Putin trying to, I think, work out his supply chain in a more meaningful manner. If you see a document, something like what North Korea had when he went to North Korea, they came back with this mutual defense pact, and now if Russia's invaded, North Korea will come to their aid, and if North Korea is invaded, Russia will come to their aid. If you see this happen with something like Iran, we're on the cusp of the preconditions for a World War III. I don't think anything like that's going to happen from anything that I can see right here, but I'm telling you what to look for, because that would be very, very bad. As far as I can tell, that's not what's happening here at the BRICS. Okay, meanwhile, big story number 3, President Biden has arrived in Berlin for a brief visit. He'll discuss the war in Ukraine with leaders from Germany, France, and the UK. Here he is speaking. A very tough winter awaits us, he says. Biden urges allies to continue supporting Ukraine during his visit to Berlin. He condemned Putin's brutal assault and emphasized that NATO remains stronger and more united than ever. We can't give up now, but you're not also supplying them with everything that they need to be able to take the fight to conclusion. You're supplying them enough to be able to sustain themselves, kind of, but not to be able to prevail. And that's really the misery here. You're afraid of escalating because you're being deterred by Russia. And that's what this amounts to. Now, Zelensky actually called this out. And I'm not saying like you're doing this, but I'm saying he's actually made it clear. This is what it is. It's either NATO or nukes, right? We either have to be nuclear rearmed, or we have to have NATO protection, one way or the other, because this just isn't working. And we choose NATO. He wants to go down that NATO path. He wasn't saying anything like trying to strong arm them, but he's saying like this is the way we have to go. This is the Kyiv Post, and rightly pointing out that Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for a paper that no one honored. Zelensky tells NATO members that Ukraine must either return to being a nuclear country or becoming a full member of NATO. Here he is saying this. Let's just read what he says. So how can we believe this document? And how can we trust all the partners who guaranteed the protection of our territorial integrity and sovereignty? The answer is very simple. Does it work? No, this document does not work. Do other major partners' agreements with Russia work? No, that is, these were not only agreements between Ukraine and Russia, but also between Ukraine and all its partners. So in general, all these agreements did not work out. Which of these big countries? All the nuclear powers were affected. All of them? No, only Ukraine. Who gave away the nuclear weapons? All of them? No, only one. Who? Ukraine. Who is at war today? Ukraine. So the moral lesson is, if you give away your nukes, then you're vulnerable to a nuclear-powered country, and that's where we are. And he's saying we either have to have nukes or we have to have NATO, one or the other. And we choose NATO, but NATO is not really choosing them. Okay, now on the other side of the equation, here's Andrew Mitcha. Andrew Mitcha is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he's saying this: a brief posting on why we continue to get Russia wrong. An often repeated fallacy in DC when it comes to Russia, and academics reinforce it, is that Russia's pressure against the West is really about their security, pushing this alleged Western threat away from its borders. Okay, now that's not really what it is. Like, how much security do they need? And if that was really true, they would have made those 4 oblasts in Ukraine a buffer zone, not part of Russia itself. They're trying to expand. They're not just trying to create a buffer zone for security. Not to put too fine a point on it, anyone who argues that today the West constitutes a credible military threat to Russia should have his or her head examined. It is odd that when it comes to Russia, our elites seem unable or unwilling to recognize the drivers of Russian expansionism. That's right. Why isn't anyone willing to ask how a tiny duchy of Muscovy that barely survived on subsistence farming expanded into an empire spanning 11 time zones, all the while, of course, desperately defending itself from invasion? Rus' "I'm threatened" line is repeated ad nauseum. That's exactly what the Russians have been doing. They've been saying, we're threatened, we have to defend our borders, we can't have NATO, right? You're 11 time zones. And if that was true, then those 4 oblasts would be part of the buffer, but they didn't do that. They expanded Rus, not create a buffer zone to not be threatened. Okay, Putin is spending 140 billion while we struggle with to promise 50. This is Gabrielis Landsbergis. He's the Lithuanian foreign minister. Good point. We are basically sending him the message, we won't stop you, so he won't stop. But if we allocated 800 billion, he'd be forced to rethink, yes, could we afford it? And yes, it would be cheaper than letting him carry on. That's exactly right. You pay now or you pay more later, and we're choosing to kick the can down the road and pay more later. This is a chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Estonian Parliament saying, make it happen. Estonia supports the immediate extension of NATO's invitation to Ukraine. So make them number 33. Now, there's probably about at least north of 20, maybe 25 of those 32 NATO nations that are already behind it, right? There's going to be a few holdouts, and we know who those are. Orban calls Zelensky's victory plan terrifying, urges negotiations with Russia. Of course he does. He's been doing that. What Zelensky outlined yesterday in Ukrainian parliament is more than terrifying, says Orban. Hungarian Prime Minister Orban rejected Zelensky's victory plan, suggesting instead to hand over occupied territories to Putin. Of course he did. Orban continues to block EU aid to Ukraine, advocating for a ceasefire and peace negotiations, stating that Ukraine cannot win militarily. So, of course, he wants Ukraine just to give up land for peace. Jake Sullivan seems to be of a similar mind. Jake Sullivan doesn't want nuclear war, but in the process of preventing a nuclear war, he's setting the conditions for nuclear proliferation. NATO is undermined from the inside by Hungary, true, Trump, true, but this inept idiot keeps talking about reforms and security conditions for Ukraine. Here's the Ukrainian review. There is still work to be done to get there, including reforms and security conditions to get into NATO. So the question is how to build a bridge from where we are now to Ukraine's possible NATO membership. Again, it's just kicking it down the road to the future so you don't have to deal with it now. Are there proposals for trading land for peace? No proposals for trading occupied territories for NATO membership. Umarov dismissed this as provocative rumors in the media. I haven't heard of anything like that. If it existed, I would have done very bad things, said Ukraine's defense minister. Okay, meanwhile, Maria Zakharova is always keeping it classy. They see Ukraine in a coffin and Ukrainian citizens in their grave. And that's why they brought this clown to power who is supposed to finish Ukraine as a state. Real nice. Okay. Now, I think this is another big story, and it's important, and it's a misstep. Brussels officially announced the stop of Georgia's accession to the EU. Now, as a conservative, I'm not a great fan of the EU, but in my estimation, it's probably good for Georgia to be in the EU. At a summit in Brussels, the leader of the European Union announced the de facto stoppage of Georgia's accession process to the EU because they've been passing some bills that were kind of obnoxious to the EU. But Putin's got to be laughing all the way to the bank about this. Like, think about this. For a few small political laws, he has gotten what he wants from Georgia, that they stop moving towards the EU and they're stuck in Putin's orbit. Like, they don't even have to invade at this point. It's amazing. The European Council reaffirmed the Union's readiness to support the Georgian people on their European path, but expressed serious concern about the course of action taken by the Georgian government. And again, you see Russia's hand behind the scenes. Ukraine has a lot of courage, but few weapons. NATO has many weapons, but little courage, says Garry Kasparov. Finally, I showed this meme in this video, which I just published before I did this video just now. It may have just begun. Did we just kick off a new nuclear arms race? I think we may have. But I showed this meme and I said, like, there's actually three paths here, right? Join NATO, nuclear armament, or one other path, which will be devastating for Ukraine and the world. Last little bit, imagine the geopolitical skill it took for Jake Sullivan to pull North Korea into this war. The guy is truly a genius. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.